In a digital world defined by speed, outrage, and short-form content, one man defied every trend and ended up building the most powerful podcast in human history. No clickbait, no viral TikToks, no trendy editing. Just a dude, in a room, asking questions. Joe Rogan didn't just become the biggest podcaster on the planet, he completely redefined what podcasting even is. From obscure conversations about aliens and elk meat to live-streamed interviews with billionaires, presidents, and some of the most controversial minds alive, Rogan turned long-form dialogue into global entertainment. But what's more insane is how it all started. Because before the $200 million Spotify deal, before the internet dubbed him the Oprah for bros, before politicians started openly begging to appear on his show, Joe Rogan was just a stand-up comic with a webcam and zero media training. The Joe Rogan Experience began in 2009. Not in a studio, but on a couch. There were no producers, no format, no game plan, just Joe and his comedian friends ranting for hours, experimenting with live stream software, and figuring things out as they went. To anyone watching, it looked like nonsense. Just another loud personality talking into the void. But under the surface, something was happening. Rogan wasn't trying to go viral. He wasn't chasing topics. He wasn't editing his opinions to stay likable. He was just curious. About science, about human behavior, about the world. And that curiosity, raw and unfiltered, became the DNA of his show. At a time when the media was becoming more scripted, more censored, more artificial, Joe Rogan's podcast felt like real life. It was messy, it was meandering, it was human, and that made it magnetic. People didn't just watch, they listened for hours, to guests they'd never heard of, on topics they didn't even care about. Because Rogan wasn't delivering news, he was discovering it, live. And that made people feel like they were part of something. While traditional media trained viewers to think in sound bites and segments, Rogan trained an entire generation to enjoy deep dives. And that shift, the renormalization of long-form conversation, is why he didn't just become a podcaster, he became the podcaster. By 2012, the show had gained serious underground traction. His guests were no longer just comics or fighters. They were scientists, nutritionists, authors, thinkers, fringe personalities. Rogan's platform became a home for voices with no other outlet. And soon, it became the destination for the most compelling and controversial conversations on the internet. Neil deGrasse Tyson, Jordan Peterson, Elon Musk, Alex Jones, Edward Snowden, Kanye West, Tulsi Gabbard, Bernie Sanders, Post Malone, Miley Cyrus, Dave Chappelle, Mike Tyson, Robert Malone, Lex Fridman. The diversity of guests became a spectacle in itself. Where else could you see a presidential candidate talking policy on Monday, followed by a conspiracy theorist ranting about chemtrails on Wednesday, then a UFC fighter explaining a liver detox on Friday? But somehow, it worked. Because Joe wasn't pushing an ideology. He wasn't looking to prove people wrong. He was there to ask questions and let the guests talk. Sometimes he pushed back, sometimes he agreed. Sometimes he just sat and listened. And that neutrality, whether intentional or not, gave the audience the thing they weren't getting anywhere else: context. They weren't told what to think. They were shown the conversation and left to decide for themselves. That's what made Joe Rogan different. While legacy media trained viewers to react, Rogan trained listeners to process. By 2018, the Joe Rogan Experience was a cultural juggernaut. The Elon Musk episode, where the world's most famous tech CEO smoked weed live on air, was a turning point. It wasn't just viral, it was symbolic. The most powerful man in tech was skipping late-night shows and press tours to do a 3-hour podcast with Joe Rogan. That moment broke the mainstream media's illusion of control. From that point on, Rogan wasn't just a popular podcaster, He was a cultural gatekeeper. If you were promoting an idea, a theory, a movie, a policy, you wanted to go on Joe's show, because that's where people actually listened. Spotify noticed. In 2020, they signed Rogan to an exclusive licensing deal reportedly worth $200 million, making it the largest podcast deal in history and one of the biggest media contracts ever signed by a solo creator. For context, that's more than most TV anchors will make in their entire careers. Rogan made it from his garage. But with the rise came a target. Because with power comes controversy. As Rogan's influence grew, the attacks followed. Journalists accused him of spreading misinformation. Reddit turned on him. Twitter mobs went after his guests. Activist groups demanded deplatforming. Musicians like Neil Young and Joni Mitchell pulled their catalogs from Spotify in protest. Even the White House chimed in. At one point, dozens of major media outlets were publishing hit pieces daily, trying to link Joe Rogan to every societal issue under the sun. He was blamed for vaccine hesitancy, political radicalization, racism, misogyny, and anything else trending that week. But the most surprising part? He survived. All of it. Because while media outlets were busy screaming about disinformation, millions of people were still tuning in. Every single episode. Not to be radicalized, but to be informed. Or just entertained. Or just to watch two people talk about elk. And when Rogan did make mistakes, which he has, he responded the way real people do. Not with PR statements, but with direct conversations. He addressed criticism on air. He invited opposing voices. He corrected false claims. And he kept the show moving. That's why the show stayed #1. Not because Joe Rogan is flawless, but because he's genuine. There's no mask, no act, no corporate script. He's not trying to be right. He's trying to understand. And that honesty is what separates him from everyone else. It's what built the trust. And in today's world, trust is the rarest currency in media. You can't buy it. You can't fake it. You earn it, slowly, over years. Joe Rogan earned it by being consistent, by being curious, by showing up year after year for over a decade, with thousands of hours of conversation across every topic imaginable. No podcaster comes close. Not in volume, not in influence, not in range. And while every major network is bleeding relevance, Rogan's audience is still growing. That's why other podcasters try to copy his style. Why celebrities suddenly want to have deep conversations. Why every media company now has a long-form interview series. They're all chasing the formula he pioneered. But none of them can recreate it. Because Joe Rogan isn't a formula. He's a person. And for millions of viewers, he's the only person in media who actually feels real. Not because he's perfect, but because he's not. Joe Rogan is the most streamed podcaster of all time. The most controversial, the most criticized, the most copied, and the most trusted. And whether you agree with him or not, one thing is undeniable. He didn't just change podcasting. He changed media. Forever.